think Gray Skull Seeds is when I got back into growing, I joined IC Mag. I think it was about 2009. I laid off growing for about 20 years as a crane operator. So I had to test negative for drugs at all times. So when I did come back, I got IC Mag and met Gray Skull, Zoolander. They both are seed producers now. And that's where I got my genetics for GG4s through him, Gray Skull Seeds. And I got the Sourdub, Kim's sister.
Okay.
Got the chocolate diesel off another guy from Nugs and Jugs party that you guys know, Elaine Outcast.
All right.
From Instagram. She hosted a really 420 party in Nevada one time, so I got to attend it. So, but the story starts, I was at a casino one time and I lost my cell phone. I couldn't find it. About a month later, I get a knock on the door about midnight, and it was the Las Vegas Police Department. And they started asking me, "Or you know this girl?" And I said, "No, sir." And to come find out, they found my cell phone at this girl's house that had been beaten and dragged down the stairs. So I was the number one suspect at that time.
Jesus.
After I talked to them for about an hour out on my front porch, they figured out I wasn't the guy they was looking for, but they said, "How many plants you got going? I smell it really nice." I lied on my ass and tell them I just got 12. I'm a medical grower, and I let my med card lapse, so I was totally illegal at the time. My wife is freaking out when I come back in the house, so we're thinking that they're going to call the vice department and get them out here. But so I tore down my grow that night and moved it all out to a friend's house. And that was about 80 plants. At the time, I was running a 1 gallon pot stadium grow. And I had the Kim sister, Sourdub, and chocolate diesel. And also one that my partner late Ross Johnson, who passed away at Lone Wadi, had grown and made by Kim's sister by Sourdub. Well, about a week later after that, it was all clear, and I went to get my plants back, hauled them home and set them up, and the cross of Kim's sister and Sourdub hermed on me and pollinated the whole room. So I was pretty bummed out about it. I gave most of the weed away. My buddy Marlin, or Mardog as he's called in IC Mag, kept some of the seeds. And so as it be about, I guess a year and a half later, we set up a grow together at a house here in Las Vegas. His medical license is my medical, and he started those seeds off the chocolate diesel. And we was real skeptical, they'd harm us, so we watched them close. But out of those seeds, we got the GG1, GG4, and this runt, which we later killed because it's an exact replica of Sourdub. But rest is history. I mean, I just passed out the GG4, and it spread like wildfire. And a guy named, I won't mention his name, but a guy entered it in a Southern California Canvas Cup, High Times Cup, and won it. It was unbelievable. I didn't think anybody had a chance unless they paid off High Time, but I guess I was wrong.
Do you remember what year that was?
That'd be somewhere 2011, 2012, I'd say.
So did your partner Murdog, he did some pheno hunting, didn't he? With those seeds?
Well, actually, we had, I think there were 6 of them that he kept and threw away. I had the grape almond in that room, and the seeds off it, we threw away, just, thinking they're herm seeds, so why even bother growing them? And the only ones we kept was those ones he had. And I think there was 5 or 6. A couple of them didn't pop. One, I think he misdiagnosed or not diagnosed, missexed as a male, which it wasn't, but he killed it anyway. But all 3 and there was GG2 that I give to a guy to keep safe, and he lost it. So we only have GG1 and GG4 of the original, and we crossed GG1 and GG4 and made GG5. Just popped some more of those seeds yesterday, germinating. See what I can find in that bunch.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Matthew.
What stood out to you about it, like when you tried it for the first time?
Unbelievable. The taste is just so nice. It was great. It's not the prettiest bag of peel plant, but just, I didn't realize it's such a good breeding plant till later on.
Like what, I guess like when you smoked it, were there like qualities that stood out to you, like taste wise or aroma wise, or?
Oh, taste wise, it's just about the yummiest thing I'd ever tasted at the time. I'm not a heavy smoker, so I really appreciate taste when I do smoke. As a commercial plant, it's sorry, it doesn't yield that well or nothing, but it's really got the taste. And obviously it bred well.
I've used, can you guys hear me right?
Kind of fuzzy, but I can hear you.
Yeah, you're a little robotic, but yeah.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Okay.
Go ahead. Talk.
Well, I know that I've used the Gorilla Glue for a lot of different crosses, and it always does pretty amazing things. I always get a wide variety of expressions, and one of the expressions that I get that it always leans towards is this like chocolate coffee smell that I get, that I'm assuming comes from the chocolate Thai. And I've had some varieties that they tasted exactly like chocolate mocha, and that's what they smell like too. And it's so interesting, the different characteristics that it brings out when you breed with it.
Yeah, it's got a lot of genes in it, so it's between the Kim Dog and Sour Dub and the Chocolate Diesel. I don't know that heritage is behind Chocolate Diesel. I heard it's Chocolate Trip by something. I don't remember what, but there's enough genetics in it to bring out flavor from gas to coffee to.
I think it's
Kim.
Chocolate Trip X East Coast Sour Diesel.
I don't know about that. Chocolate Trip, if it was a sour diesel or not.
I was saying that's what I thought it was crossed to.
No, there's no sour diesel cross in it. It was chocolate diesel, sour dub, and Kim's sister.
I just wanted to make a comment on something you said earlier, and I wanted to first and foremost just say thank you. And the reason for the thank you, and it's not just from me, the chat has more than one person in chat has already said to make sure to thank you for bringing the strain to everyone. And what I think is important is when you were going through your keeper phenos, the 1 and number 4, and you said you gave out the number 4 everywhere. I just want to thank you for that, because in this industry, I'm sure you well know, a lot of people, when they find a gem like that, they just want to hoard it. That's like their first instinct. And for you to go out and to spread that around, I just want to thank you for that.
I thank you for liking it. I was a new member in IC Mag at the time and trying to get the quality genetics to grow, and nobody would, share anything. Grayskull was one of the only ones in Zoolander that would share. So when I made G4 and I knew it was good, I wanted to share it with everybody so that little grower like myself could get quality genetics to grow. So it went fast and far. A lot of people sold it, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be given and not be given to the shops to clone out and sell as commercial, but no way to stop that. in all actuality, but if I had to give it out, I'd been sitting here on it and nobody'd know about it. And I wouldn't have been able to do anything with it in my medical grow, so I'd grow it and smoke it.
Similarly, I was introduced to it recently, and I actually really enjoyed it as well. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're all welcome.
I'd say it
Yeah,
has one of the
so-
most unique flavors, and I'm happy that you said that stood out to you first when, like, that's what you first noticed about it, because that's the first thing I noticed about it was the flavor was different than anything I tried, but it was very pleasant, but just very unique. Every time I have it, I'm like, oh, that's glue, or it's got glue in it. It's got a very distinct flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Because of its distinctness, I guess that's part of the reason I asked the question, like, what about I guess I should have been more specific or articulate. Like, when you guys do smoke it, I'm curious what all of y'all note about it specifically. I like what Brandon had brought up already.
The euphoric buzz is the part that always stood out to me. It always had a really euphoric buzz, very uplifting, amazing buzz on it. And when it's bred into stuff, it really helps with the yield and those things also, and the resin content.
Yeah, definitely the resin.
Yeah, I want to agree with that. It's not just the flavor, it's the effect that it has. I mean, it's one of the most sort of powerful and pleasant highs that's out there, I think. It's one of my favorite strains.
I'd have to agree, even with, all the stuff that's testing, all in the 40s or whatever. And I've actually had some outdoor Gorilla Glue 4, and it was amazing. I mean, it wasn't as, terpenous and resinous as you could do indoors, but it was still pretty good. And I'd just like to say thank you again for, bringing that and giving it away. I mean, that's absolutely something that is, profound in the cannabis community.
Well, some people have followed my lead with it. Chunky Pigs and OG Cushbred 2.0 was an awesome strain. He's handed it out, so I'm not the only one, but I appreciate you guys liking it.
Yeah, I definitely have to say it's like a go-to for like any occasion, really. I mean, my wife, she's in love with it. I mean, if anytime I've grown it, it never lasts around here.
Well, one thing I'd like to bring up too, coming from the medicinal aspect of it too, as a caregiver, my time as here in Michigan, for just the straight pain relief and something that would punch through anything else, that was always my go-to. That was the one that I would give to a patient who was fighting cancer. That was the one that I'd give to a patient who was, recovering from a surgery. And it seemed like it always would help them more than anything else. So there is a medicinal aspect to the potency too. I mean, it's
Oh, sure is. Yes. After I had open heart surgery, I had anxiety so bad, and that's the only thing that could kill the anxiety. I'd eat a chunk of GG4 hash and just stop the anxiety totally for weeks at a time. I was so bad I could take sleeping pills and I still couldn't sleep. The anxiety was it had a grip on me. But not with GG4, killed it.
And that's what was special about the GG4 is usually the high potency strains are the ones that give you the anxiety. And this one really didn't do that to you. So it's just something special about that strain.
Yes, sir.
I can agree with that pain relieving quality. I banged my elbow today on a metal rack, my funny bone, and it's like swollen and hurt all day long. And when I got home, I've been smoking GG4 and a GG4 cross, and I literally feel the swelling going down and the pain's just been dropping off each bowl I smoke.
Nice.
So I'm absolutely a big fan of it from the medical perspective as well.
Oh, God, several people tell me. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, good.
Okay, Dan, go.
I have a question. So from, one of the things back in the day, I think one of the reasons why a lot of people held on to everything they had, because it was kind of like their bread and butter. And if it was something that was, that had a good value to it, they would hold on to it and try to not give it out. That way they could keep the market demand high and they could sell for higher prices. And so that was one of the reasons that a lot of stuff wouldn't get out.
Right.
And having, giving out, so much, I definitely appreciate it. I love the cut and I grow it. How has it affected you? How has it impacted you, like, in your life in general? Like,
Well, really, it's the foundation behind GG Strains. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what GG Strains is doing, but it's our stepping stone to that whole business. And
Can I ask a question to lead into that?
Yeah.
So, like, I'll ask this for people that might not be familiar. Can you give the history about how Gorilla Glue actually sort of legally interacted with you and why the name is now GG4 and GG Strains?
Well, they called my house one time and informed me who the lawyer was calling and a lawsuit, which I thought was bullshit. So I hung up on him. And about 2 weeks later, he called again. So I listened to him and said that they're going to sue us and for using the word Gorilla Glue. And so we had to get lawyers. So I set up a call with him, the lawyer, and my partner, which is better at speaking and business-minded than I am, which passed away just recently, Ross. And we talked, and we finally had to hire some lawyers and negotiate a deal, and we settled out of court. But it was very costly. We still owe the lawyers a lot of money, so paying that back and trying to keep the business going.
Wow. So I just want to say rest in peace to Ross. That's really sad to hear about his passing. And now
Yeah.
you can sort of tell us a little bit about GG Strains. It's it seems to me from the outside looking in a little bit like you're licensing out the strain name
Yes.
to legal states and people that can grow.
Yes, marketing, licensing, business. They get our strains. We get a percentage of each crop. And it's not too good for the small time growers, but for the big growers, they're getting quality genetics for pennies. Don't have to pheno hunt. We do the pheno hunting and provide our quality genetics for them to grow.
I like that from the user perspective. If I was to get something from someone who paid the licensing and got it from you, I know then it's verified, legitimate, the true genetics. If I'm getting a GG4, that's actually what I want to get, not some random
Yes.
cross.
That's the most important thing of it all. I forgot to mention that, but they're all certified genetics from us. And I know a lot of people don't like Phylos and Truby, but we've had them all tested and they're all, I guess you'd say, trademarked their name, and they're certified that is what they are. So if
I
somebody
think
said
that's
they
an
have
awesome business model.
Pardon me?
I think it's a great business model for you to be able to, license out and to be able to have that name and the legitimacy to back that name up. I think that's a huge thing. I think that's really important, especially with how much misinformation that I've seen within the newly emerging industry, where there's a lot of mislabeling and people, trying to just, make money as fast as they can. I think that having that name attached to a product is going to be a huge thing, and I hope people recognize, the what that means and what kind of quality it's associated with. I know some really good people that are growing some Gorilla Glue at their facilities. I know that they're licensed, that you're doing licensing with them, and they're amazing. And I think that it's a wonderful thing that you're doing.
Thank you. We're trying.
Hey, Josie, I'm curious, how has business been for you these past couple of years?
It's picking up. It's really hard at the beginning, but as this new legality moves forward, it's getting easier, and some really big outfits have contacted us and talking to us. And, ones like Fat Panda, we would blessed to work with in Washington State. They've been our bread and butter so far. So
Okay. Yeah, some Josie.
We definitely love it here. I'm from Washington State, and yeah, I have to say that it's not really on the market. So, I mean, anybody that is growing it is actually, making a pretty decent profit.
good.
Hey, Josie, I'm curious about something. Can you, I mean, I know this isn't so much growing, but, without revealing too much information, but can you walk us through the licensing of, the GG4 strains? I mean, like, how does that all work? If that's something that you want to get into, and if not, that's perfectly fine too.
Well, it's pretty basic. Like I said, we supply our cuts. How they get there, I don't know. Most of them are in state already because like crossing state lines is illegal, so we try not to do that. And we get so much a gram. I won't say on air how much that is, but for each harvest, we get so much pennies per gram, and the track and trace metric system provides us with what they're selling and what the name of it is, so we know. It keeps track of what they owe us, and that's how we get paid.
I gotta say that sounds very fair. A lot of people recently have looked down on Phylos, but I think the way that you're using it is the way that everyone wanted to and intended to, with like the prior art, being able to map your genome and show that it's truly what it is. I think what they did was sort of underhanded by saying they weren't going to be a breeding company and they weren't going to be a tissue culture company. And like, that's a separate episode. But I think,
Yes.
I think everybody wishes, like breeders like yourself and DJ Short and all these people that put the time in and found something special, you should get the credit. And you should be able to have like a legacy way to come in to the markets and be rewarded for it. So it's unfortunate that the other things happen with Phylos, but I think you were doing the right thing, trying to just verify and have the most scientifically rooted background.
I mean, similarly, and I always mention it, there's this loquat cultivar that I have at my house called Big Jim, and it's named after a man in San Diego where I live, where I'm at right now. And he bred this cultivar and now is pretty much the most common one here and possibly even in California. And so I think it's kind of cool to like know the name attached to it and then have the understanding of, like Jack mentioned, the genome and like, why do we like it? And you can ask those questions because you have a genetic background to marry to the name.
And I hate to always pull it back to the medicinal side, but let's not forget the medicine aspect of this. If you have a DNA-backed test proving the genetics of that plant is what they say it is, and you know that mix of terpenes / cannabinoids / everything else is in that cultivar actually helps you for whatever your ailment is, then that's a powerful thing to be able to have a stamp on the end product saying, certified or whatever it is, or, licensed strain, that what you're getting is medicine. I mean, just the market and the open market is CBD right now, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, agreed. Totally.
I definitely agree.
Josie, as far as cultivation practices, I think personally that heavily influences the results that we were just talking about as far as the medicine. What are your preferred like lighting and let's say like what do you grow in? What's your style? Organic, synthetic?
I'm so old fashioned, it's pathetic. I'm still running 1,000 watts HVS bulbs because I've got such a small grow space. I'm not allowed 12 plants. My wife's got her grow card, so I'm another 12, so I get 24 total. So I try to keep some flowering, perpetual harvest, and some in beds, cloning. And I use cocoa, general hydroponics, goal line, the stinky stuff, and some of Russ. Send me some. I can't pronounce what it is. Russ, help me out on this.
Bokashi?
Yep, there he is. It seems to be looking good.
It's Bokashi.
Okay.
Brandon makes some great bokashi.
He does indeed.
I like a lot of the amendments in there that he, I didn't even realize there was so much good stuff in there that would be in like a super soil almost.
Yeah, so what I did with the EM1 Bokashi is I did the EM1. I didn't do like a lot of the like indigenous microorganisms that I see a lot of people using, just because there's scientific research to back up the EM1. And then I added, I actually did a bunch of different recipes, and then I found that using soy hydrolysate and some of the other organic inputs help sustain it longer. And then it also adds those inputs quicker into the soil. So especially when you have a living soil or you have earthworms in there, it just builds everything up really quickly. And it also helps too, like if you are doing synthetics, it actually will help break down all the salts that are in it.
Yeah, so Joesy, you're growing in cocoa, huh?
Yep. Cocoa.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love it. We would be honored if you'd come by and check out our Cocoa for Cannabis. That's really our main topic, is growing in cocoa core and sort of teaching growers how to make maximum advantage of the media.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
You'll probably teach me something.
I don't know about that, but we'd be honored. We have a live chat room. We have a forum there. I mean, if you ever popped your head into our chat room, I'm sure all my members would just about lose their minds. But yeah, I got a bunch of articles on fertigation, on growing in cocoa. And if you'd do me the honor of checking those out, I'd be really happy.
Yeah, send me a message on Instagram and I'll link it up so I can follow you and
Oh,
see
awesome.
what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll reach out to you on Instagram.
I have to say, it's really cool to see these sorts of joinings.
I think so too. Like I said, I like the positive side of this group.
Thank you, Josie.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do appreciate that.
I'll tell you what, guys. Let's go to Mr. Can. Can, you've been quiet so far. Do you have any questions or comments for Josie?
No, honestly, I've just kind of been enjoying listening to everything. I think there's a ton of value in not just growing, but learning about the history of, some of these great strains and cultivars that we got. And no, I think everything that everyone said, I back 100%, and I think it's great. So no, I don't have any specific questions right now, but I'm sure I'll chime in if I do.
Okay, Mr. Can. But Josie, I'm curious. You mentioned that you're growing in cocoa core. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Because to be perfectly honest with you, a old school guy like yourself, I mean, quite frankly, I kind of figure that you would grow organically. But if you could you tell us a little bit more about your medium?
Well, actually, I take a bag of Roots Organic and a bag of BioBiz cocoa, and I mix them together, so it's not straight cocoa. Then I just use the Go line and Russ's product and water with that. I flush every 3 days. I just run cold, straight water through them, tap water. It's not even RO water. I find that Gorilla Glue strains don't need that much fertilizer. They can just do wonderful without heavy feeding. I see so many people overfeeding it, and they get small, little, nasty looking buds and wonder why their Gorilla Glue is so shitty. But basically, it's so simple. I just don't see no use of going any further. I'd like to try totally organic, living soil, but at my age and my physical condition, I really can't build beds, and once I got them done, it'd probably be fine, but just getting it done is a lot easier for me to just do cocoa.
I think this speaks to a point that I've made in the past about how like people should, and other people here on the panel as well, that you shouldn't shame somebody, for not growing in a certain way, because circumstances really dictate how you cultivate.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
I agree, and I'll say this: like, I just harvested a Gorilla Glue cross in cocoa, and I think when you do it properly, it can taste just as good, if not better than soil. My cat's meowing at me over here, but I think the point is, if you do things properly and you have a good method that works for you, at the end of the day, who cares? Do what works best for you and makes you happy.
I agree totally. Only thing I notice with organics is you get more color in your plants. I think.
I
could
was
be
just
wrong
about
about
to say
that.
something about that. I actually did a scrog in a 4x4 with it was actually bag seed from one of the established GG4 growers here in Washington. It's really hard to get a hold of any of their stuff now, but I did that in soil. I did a combination of top dressings and feeding fertilizers. And then I actually just grew across the GG1 and a lily from Expert Seeds. And that is actually super resinous. And I actually have some posts on Instagram about it. It's super crystally. I couldn't believe my eyes.
Well, that's what gets me is how Expert Seeds can say they got seeds GG1 when it's never been released to anybody. It's just beyond my belief that they can con people into believing that they made GG1. And I realize GG4 they can back cross or sell S1s, but GG1 has never been released to the public. It's been released to some of our contracted growers, but that's it.
That's really interesting that you say that. I mean, I just purchased a few seeds, supposedly GG1, and
It's sort of what we talked about last episode with, or maybe a few episodes back with shady breeder practices. I think this happens more often than we might think, where we can't figure out if it's true or not if they have it, but you buy the seeds and try it.
I went to go look for the seeds that I purchased, and they weren't even available. They were taken off the shelf, and I can't even find any information on the grower site or the breeder site that actually distributed the seeds. So,
Well, Moscanegra had posted a picture of some rolled joints, and he put what they were and where they got them. And one was GG4 from Expert Seeds. I get kind of touchy on the subject. It can be Gorilla Glue, but it can't be GG4. That's Pacific Pheno that I found, and nobody else out there. They back cross it. Could be marked as a back cross or a S1 or GG4 S1, but it cannot be just GG4. It's impossible.
Yeah, I assumed a lot of those were S1s, and that people were just selling the S1 variety as the originals.
Yeah,
I actually seen that there was some P1s on Instagram, some company and that you actually approved of them working the P1.
Yes, Mike Kotek.
On Instagram. I can't remember the company, but they were about to release the P1s.
Yeah, he changed the IBL, but he's a good friend of mine. He's worked that line really hard and honestly, and tells you what they are. He's never claimed to be GG4, straight GG4. He's naming different names, Unbroken Chain, Three Gorillas, and stuff like that. So he's put a lot of work in. He's a good guy.
So, one of the things is I actually love working the line. I do back crosses, reverse back crosses, which are S1s, and I always clarify what it is, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yes.
How do you feel about, for me, giving credit where credit is due is very important to me. And I like to use the Gorilla Glue, and I've used it in a lot of different crosses, and I've come up with a lot of different amazing things. And one of the things that I always like to do is say, hey, this is exactly what this is, and I document it to make sure, like, hey, and that's, I think, one of the things that's really important to remember too, is a lot of these old school varieties, they're clone only. So
Yeah.
if someone is claiming that they have like Romulan seeds, or they have OG Kush seeds, sour diesel seeds, you need to check the legitimacy of the source and see exactly what it is. Because from experience, like we did the Afghan Bull Rider, we did the P91, we did the San Diego Cactus, Blueberry Trainwreck, these things are all clone only. You cannot get these in seed form, and the only way you could get them was if they had been handed down from somebody within the circle, and there was always the stipulation of, don't give this out to anybody, you can have it, and so you have to remember, like, there's a huge emerging industry, but there's also this old school community. So if you can look back into the history of things, which is like one of the things that I find most important, in knowing the source of where things come from. So that way you don't get screwed. And then also, if you are growing something, always give people the credit, for who bred it.
I agree totally.
That's one thing I appreciate when you mention things, Jack. Like, I always try to be like a sponge, because I don't really know all of that lore. And I would not have, if somebody said, "Oh yeah, these are Romulan seeds," I've been like, "Oh, okay, cool." Like, I would have known.
It's
What
tough.
Jack says is totally true. I mean, if you don't research what you're getting and know what you're getting, it's a waste of time, really. That's why we genetically went through TrueBreed and Phylos and mapped these genetics out. So, say this expert seeds with GG1, I can take a leaf off his product and send it in and prove it's not GG1, because I've got it filed there at Phylos and I got paperwork here. It won't match, I guarantee you. So,
Yeah, these was also a seed mix-up. I was supposed to get the GG4 automatic, and it was just some strain that I just randomly
I
found
wasn't
out.
knocking you for it at all. I was just expert seeds, more or less. I was knocking on. I know you're buying a product and you expect it. You got something different, and I appreciate you even telling us about it.
I appreciate you telling me that it's not even what it is. So I mean, it's pretty crazy.
So what's the important part is you liked it, though. That's good.
I've got a question.
Some of the similar tastes are there. The pine and a little bit of chocolate. It does also have some of the euphoric effects. So.
Well, that's odd, because that sounds like GG1, but how they got it, I wouldn't know.
Hey, so Joesy, I got a clone dispensary here. I'm in Los Angeles, and they sell cuts of GG4. I've suspected that they were original cuts. Is that what you would suspect?
They should be.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's been out there so long, they should be.
Yeah, no, they're a reputable clone dispensary, so I was assuming that they were. And they also told me that it was a clone-only strain, and that all the seeds were probably S1s too. So
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna have to go get one after this conversation. We're doing a beat the best challenge, and I think I'm gonna have to enter a clone of the GG4 into that. It's probably gonna win.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
Always like those wins.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Joesy, I got it.
Brandon, just hold on for 1 second. I think Spartan Ground wanted to ask a question for Joesy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Joesy, I was just gonna ask you, as a grower to a grower, I'm sure GG4 is not the only thing in your garden right now. What else you got going on in there?
Oh, right now we got Seed Junkies. What is he make? It's Kush Matt, or the other one.
The wedding cake?
Wedding cake, yeah, F2 wedding cake by Kush Match 11. Female, I just hit it with some pollen off of my Kotex IBL. GG4 male, and see what I get out of that. I've got a Hammerhead Genetics flashbang. I don't even know the history of that. Read about it a little bit the other day. It's a bag seed cross with something else. Really liking the structure of it and looks. Just put it in flower a week ago.
What'd you look for in the male GG4 from the IBL?
Well, I wish I'd had more to go through. So I wasn't really too impressed with this male that he used. Wasn't as robust as I like, but I look for health and vigor and pollen production, and I got little of either on this particular male. And I do have seeds. I was hoping for a lot more. But that's a curse of being a small time pollen chucker. I won't even say breeder.
I have a tendency to, do small batch pollination. That's how I make all of my seeds. And I will take, just little manners, and I'll make a couple seeds here and there, feed them through what I get, and sometimes I find some amazing stuff. Sometimes I just hot trash and I waste space. But it's always so awesome to be able to find a new flavor and just to see those flavors develop throughout flowering and see how the plant does. It's like the best feeling ever, really. I love being in the garden.
It's an adventure. It really is. It's fun.
Isn't it interesting? It looks like that breeding. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say it looks like breeding is going more towards flavor now than anything else. They don't care about anything else except for flavor, which is kind of a thing.
It seems to be the case, but
I think it's really important. I think flavor is really, really important nowadays. There's, I've tasted some pretty interesting varieties of cannabis, and if you can really bring out those terpene profiles in them, you can have some different varietals that express really, really heavy flavoring. Speaking of which, what are all of the panel's members' favorite variety? What's your guys' favorite thing to smoke? Who grew it?
I'll start out with, I think Sour Dub is my favorite of all time. For high taste and just general enjoyment.
Do you find that you like citrus or like citrus taste the most specifically, Joesy?
No, not at all. It's, I like the more gassy Sour Dub taste of, I don't know if it's gassy or, but
It's is it like a pine saw fuel type smell? Is that kind of what you're describing?
yeah, pretty much. I'm not too much on the fruity strains. I like to taste them one time, but after I taste them, it just gets boring to me.
So Sour Dub is originally from Bog Seeds, right? And you said you got yours through
Grayskull.
Gray Skull. So
Yeah.
that's, did he get his from Bog Seeds?
Yes,
Because
he
that's
did.
like one of Bog's flagship. Okay.
Actually, one of his closest friends, he won't ever tell me his name, so I know it's undercover, was given these seeds by Bog.
And Bog, for anyone who doesn't know, is bushy older grower.
Yeah.
I believe he's from IC Mag, and he's an old
Yeah.
school guy. He's been in it for a long time. He's got like
Very long.
Lifesavers, Sour Double. He's got a lot of really good stuff.
Sour Bubble
Thanks
was well known.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us about all of that. I did not know at all. I thought, oh, bog, like that's swampy. I wonder what that's supposed to designate.
No.
It's funny. I'm kind of that question is like I like the new stuff I'm growing. It seems like that's what I'm always reaching for. And right now, what I'm really liking, Subcool actually sent me a tester of a DJ Short Blueberry crossed with a Cal Cushman's. Is it Strawberry Cough or Raspberry Cough? Or
Strawberry Cough.
Strawberry cough, crossed with strawberry cough. And oh my God, I got this number 2 pheno out of 4 that I was running. It's just so good tasting. It's like you just want to keep smoking it and keep smoking it and keep smoking it. I just love the flavor that I'm getting out of it. So
That's neat.
I'm excited about that because I've actually got strawberry daiquiri from Subcool right now, which is Jack the Ripper crossed to Kyle Cushman strawberry cough as well. I've got 3 females that are about to go into flower here pretty shortly.
oh, that's going to be awesome. That's one thing I'll give it to Subcool and TGA. They could bring the flavors, man. They really bring the flavor on some of that stuff.
I also like the Jack the Ripper just because it's, in my experience, been a really strong head high and gets me focused and like functional, which I really enjoy. And Joesy, it sounds really like you are all about the positivity and like paying it forward. And I just wanted to share a little bit of a story because before we were on the podcast, I was talking about one of the flavors that I just harvested, but it was off air. So I wanted to give a shout out to my buddy. He broke his little like hash wands. So I went to my local grow shop and got him these little like glow wands that you use to smoke hash. It's like a glass rod that you heat up. And I sent him to him for free. He lives up in Crescent City at the time, which is like Northern California. He's been breeding since like 2007. And one of his objectives was, like you talked about, good genetics weren't just easy to come by back then. He wanted to give out the gas because people were really holding on to like OG Kush and people were paying thousands of dollars for cuts. So he wanted to make a gassy strain available. And he went out on his journey and he made this strain called Del Norte Fuel, which is a cross with Mexican Landrace, which he crossed to Chem 4, which he then got an OG, he back crossed the OG, and finally he OG back crossed twice and hit that finally with a GG4 to tie it all together. And I just had my first harvest of that, crossed to Purple Punch, which he calls Spiked Punch. And the flavor is like outrageous. On the inhale, it's like if you crushed up a packet of Smarties, and on the exhale, it's like your mouth and throat are coated with like gasoline for like 5 to 10 minutes afterwards. It's really unique. So I just want to shout out at Doja DNA or at vegan_Doja because he really just paid it forward. He sent me a bunch of seeds and some really good hash rosin. So shout out to him.
Oh, nice. I'll break your arm for them seeds.
I'll actually, hey, we can make it happen. We can get some over to you.
I appreciate that. I love GG4 crosses. I've got a box full of them. I love them.
I'm doing a few crosses right now with the Black Lime Reserve from Mean Gene from Medicinal, and I always get some amazing stuff out of there. And I've got a really awesome purple pheno that I'm really digging right now. Oh man,
it was a pretty.
I really liked them when you showed me that. That was they smelled really nice.
And it's stacking up so early in flower. Ooh, it looks great.
Well, I'm really happy with it. You know, my all-time favorite smoke though. I have a friend out here, and he's been breeding for years and years and years. He's almost in his 50s, and he's one of the old school cats out here. And he bred a DJ Shorts male from the 90s with the Trainwreck and made Trainwreck Blueberry. And that is probably one of the most unique and one of my favorite varieties to grow and smoke.
Sounds good. Mm-hmm. There's so many combinations to work with and play with. It's just never ending. I just got enough room. I just want to do it all. Look at them seeds I got in my packs and oh, when can I pop these?
My name is Brandon, and I'm addicted to growing cannabis.
Not a bad addiction.
I was going to say, sorry, as someone coming from a plant count limited state from one to another, do you find that because you have a 24 plant count limit, do you grow big plants or bigger plants?
I try to, yes. I'm growing like 4 per 1,000 watt right now. I actually do better when I do 2 or 3, but I got so many things that I'm trying to flower out and test and see what is. I go ahead and put 4 in there, sometimes 5. But it's
what kind of training do you do?
Oh, not much. I top and shave off the legs pretty good, just where the tops are in the light. Keep the bottoms trimmed up as much as I can. I can't get down like you used to. You just growing a scrog, but I can't get that down underneath the screen to harvest them anymore. So I let them grow naturally with stakes.
Yeah, harvesting out of a scrog is a pain. I mean, doing anything
It
under
is.
the scrog is a pain too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have so many stakes in my garden that it is ridiculous, and it takes time because I Velcro every single one up, and I will spend, I'll spend 4 hours just Velcroing stuff. Let's Velcro this, let's Velcro this. The Gorilla Glue, in my opinion, it will grow really nice, solid, chunky buds, and but it doesn't have a whole lot of support, and they always need to be staked.
Yeah, they definitely need to be staked. I mainlined mine, and they were, what I really liked about growing the GG4 was sort of, it was a very friendly plant to grow. It was totally willing to just sort of keep growing out laterally and wouldn't turn around and just sort of bolt back up towards the roof of the tent, which a lot of plants try to do. So I really enjoyed it. It kind of was a well-behaved plant that would go where I wanted it to.
Yeah, you got to control it though, or it'll flop all over the place.
Yeah, no, it definitely requires support to prop up the colas. But I mean, I'm used to that with whenever you mainline a plant or manifold it, you're going to have to do that. So.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any strain specific tips you might have while we're kind of going down that route to growing it. I've noticed the same thing. I've got a supporter a lot more than I would maybe some other plants. But you mentioned before that it's kind of a low feeder. You don't think it needs, you want to be careful not to overfeed her. Is there anything else?
No, not really. I just see too many people pumping up, 2,000 ppm or high EC, whatever which one you want to use, but it's totally don't need it in cocoa anyway. 1.2,
Yeah, I definitely second that.
1.2 is enough to make it do what you want. It'll produce.
I think across the board, people overfeed their plants, and GG4 is just one of many examples of plants that could do better if people gave a little less nutrient.
Yeah, I agree. I think 1.2 is pretty much a solid fertigation in cocoa, especially if you're doing fertigation at every event. I would almost never recommend growers go much above 1.2 for inflow. So yeah, I would probably want to grow GG4 a little lower, maybe right around 1.0.
Yeah, probably possible. Because I have a tendency to overdo stuff myself.
Yeah, and of that 1.0, of course, a lot of it's going to be CalMag. So the actual base NER is a pretty light load. But again, you don't need to, they're not fertilizer dependent usually. And I really agree. I think that's a great point.
Baked Pawn asks, does the guest sell seeds or have a seed bank distributor?
Not yet. We are supposed to have a release very soon, a pure sativa in the UK, some S1s and a Karma collab with Headbanger.
I'm excited to hear that. Karma's got some good stuff.
I'm working on something for here in the US, but it's nothing's finalized yet. Still getting my feet wet in the seed business. Like I said, I'm not a breeder. I'm a pollen checker from way back, but as far as being a Karma or a Salmon Skunk Man, I'm not that big. And never will be. But I'm just trying to do what I can do and take my business where I can take it. Well, I would give a shout out to my partner I have now, a Cat. She helps run the business, or does run the business, and I take care of the seed making, growing, and pinot hunting. So if Cat hears this, we love you.
Shout out to Cat right there.
Behind every great man, a great woman. I've always heard.
Catwoman.
And I think her Instagram handle is cat_GG4.
Strains.
strains, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's cat_GG Strings.
Mine is Joesy Whales 1 at GG Strains.
Maybe someone should write in the chat.
Yeah, hold on, guys. Let me see.
I always misspell Josie. Sorry.
I spelled it
Fuck it up every
wrong.
time.
Yeah, I spelled it wrong on purpose. I don't want Clint Eastwood suing me.
I was going to ask you, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but is that where you got the name from the movie?
Yeah, it was one of my favorite movies.
It's funny. That was my dad's favorite movie. I've seen that movie probably 50 times.
Me too. I watch it every time it comes on. I'm an old cowboy. I grew up in the farm and horses and roping and all that kind of stuff. Bean farm in Colorado, so I got farming in my blood.
That's awesome.
Hey, Josie, moving forward, I mean, where do you see, so I'm curious. I mean, since consuming cannabis is legal in Canada, is that a market that your company has targeted? Are you guys currently in Canada right now?
Not currently, but vastly close to signing a deal. I can't say with who or when, but I've been negotiating for a couple months now.
You heard it here first. That's interesting.
Yes.
I have a question. I have a question, and this is one of the things that is kind of like a thing that pertains to the industry in a whole. I know that there is a lot of people who are interested in cannabis branding, and there's a lot of different people from, actors to musicians, that all, they're doing licensing deals with large companies. If you have something that you want to be associated with quality product, are you carefully selecting the companies that you do business with? And is there any way that you can do like a quality check to make sure that the end user is getting what you originally intended?
Yes, that's where I miss my partner Ross so much for it, because he physically go to the grow facilities and check out the grows. And I'm on dialysis every night, so I'm pretty bad bound to home to do my home dialysis. So I'm not being able to travel. I'm trying to break my son in. He's 30-some years old. He know nothing about growing. His dad's been growing all his life, but he doesn't know nothing. So I'm trying to break him in to take Ross's place and do that sort of thing. And the branding part of it, to me, is very important, that for his future and his kids' future, because I'm not going to last, maybe another 5 years and I'll be gone. So
I can see this is kind of an emotional subject for you. I'm sorry if I hit an emotional chord. I think that you have a lot of passion, and again, I'm so sorry for your loss. And if there's anything I can ever do, you just reach out. I'd love to be able to help any way I can.
Well, thank you. It's just something we all got to deal with. Life is not forever, so it's hard to deal with sometimes, and you move on.
Josie, I'm curious, like when your partner, well, again, I don't mean to bring up a sore subject, but I mean,
That's all right.
Thank you. When you said that he inspected facilities, can you? I'm really curious about that. I mean, what exactly did he look for? I mean, what are some telltale signs of a good facility versus a bad facility? And really, how do you actually make sure that company is doing what they said, that they are actually going to do?
Well, basically, we look at what kind of growers there are. We can go and look at the product they're producing and see their plants and know if they're overfeeding or they got powder and mildew, or are they worth signing for a contract. And, you know, the metric system, that's how we can tell if they're producing our genetics and selling our genetics. That's the only way we can track and trace it. That's why we prefer states that are track and trace on all their products at the growth facilities.
Yes, I'm curious. Do you use any special software for that process?
No, sir.
No. Okay. You know, I asked because I did a podcast with a gentleman approximately like a year and a half. Yeah, he was one of my first podcasters, and I forgot. Well, this was a while ago, and yeah, I mean, his company was a seed to sale software company, and let me see if I can find it. Let me see here.
While you look for that, Josie, do you know of Brothers Grimm and Mr. Soul?
I know of him, yes.
I just ask because I see what he's doing right now in Colorado, and he's pretty successfully, in my opinion, expanding to most of the legal markets and getting his seeds and getting his product on shelves. And I think you might even see it in Vegas. They're out there. So I was curious if maybe, because I think he's an old IC Mag guy as well, and if you guys had ever talked. And I feel like sometimes you guys could stick together and maybe he could show you how to get into these markets like he has been able to.
I haven't associated with him. My partner Ross had talked to Sol, S-O-L, whatever his name. I can't know how to pronounce it exactly.
Yeah, it's Mr. Soul, S-O-U-L, and it's
Mr.
underscore
Soul.
C99. He's the guy who bred the Cinderella 99
Yeah.
plant.
Yeah, we talked about doing a collab with him, but he decided not to and went his own way. So I can't say nothing good or bad about the man. I don't know him. But I don't know exactly what he's doing with his seeds, how he's working it. But back to the software question, you asked the wrong guy about that, because what Kat does on her end, to keep track of all this stuff, the money coming in, the projections, and that sort of thing is all her end of the job. She really runs the company.
Okay.
It's important to know what we're good at, right? You know, you're doing the stuff that you're best at, and you're allowing other people to take their time so you don't have to. Doing things that you're not.
I have no choice, and she's a sweetheart. She does a good job.
We had a question in the chat, and I'm actually curious about right now because I'm growing one of your crosses. Lord Blueberry asks, what does Josie think of people using your genetics to breed with?
Well, with GG4, it's given away, so you're open to breed with it, but just label it as what it is. If it's a cross, it's a cross. It's not Gorilla Glue 4, how much you breed it. It's whatever you cross it with by Gorilla Glue 4. So I don't know. The honesty to me is the most important thing in that part of the deal.
Personally, I really like that. I like that outlook, that sentiment, because then you can't, I mean, as long as the credit is given, you know, like if I made something personally and like people knew of it, and as long as people knew who like is the progenitor of that particular cultivar, like I would be okay with that probably. I mean, for the most part, I don't think I would be bitter about that sort of a thing, really. But I guess I'm not trying to say that it is wrong to be any other way, but I do like the sentiment behind that.
Well, thank you. I do get pissed sometimes when I see somebody selling seed to GG4 and I know it's not. So I do got my moments.
I'm someone who does a lot of Gorilla Glue 4 crosses. Again, I always, make sure that I label everything appropriately, but I've always found some really and one of the things that I think people do too is they don't. It's just there's a lot of misinformation. People aren't giving it word credits to, so I was able to kind of bring this thing together because I do try to always say, hey, this is what I'm doing. You know, I'm just doing home grow. I'm not a, you know, licensed facility. If I was, I would definitely link up and support the cause. And I just think that, you know, as long as people, you know, tell the truth, because I've had instances where I've gone into shops and they've completely just changed the name, or they'll totally mislabel things and try to market things just with, you know, to get at the cash grab, I guess.
Oh, I agree totally. I walked into a dispensary here one time and I started asking about Gorilla Glue, what they had. They had Gorilla Glue 4, they had Gorilla Glue 5, and had Gorilla Glue 1. I said, how do you know these are real? Oh, they're real. We know the guy that made them. You do? What's his name? Oh, Sam somebody. You know, I just got so mad I had to walk out the damn shop because I just couldn't control my mouth. So I just, the bud tenders, they don't know no better, but it's amazing that the
There's a lot of bad,
educated part
There's
of
a
the
lot.
business.
there's a lot of bad practices when it comes to bud tenders and the knowledge that they actually possess, and it's not their fault. I think it's the people who are running the places, and there's so much misinformation. I get ruined now. I've dealt with it too, where you're like, you know, you have your baby and like you've made this thing, and you go into a place, and this is what this is, these are the genetics, this is what it's called, and then you go back in there, you know, a week later, and they're like, oh, well, we had something called this and this, so we decided to call it this, and you're just like
Yeah.
you're just like, dude, you're slapping yourself in the face. It's like, what are you guys doing? You know, I'm trying to market this as this is what it is. It's so frustrating.
You find that so often in these dispensaries that they will take anything that's not selling and change the name to Gorilla Glue and sell it off my name, actually, that I created to use to fill their pockets. So it's, you know, it's a greedy part of the business that we can't control. So
Yeah, and in the
That's why-
process that they do that, they actually hurt your brand.
they hurt the brand, they hurt the consumers,
Wow.
they're screwing everybody. I've had so many people tell me, you know, I smoked GG4, it wasn't nothing special. It's highly overrated. I tell them, well, obviously you haven't smoked the real GG4, but you know, some
That's
people
what I
don't
would
like
say.
it. I can accept it. You know, if they don't like it, that's cool too. But
Going back a little bit to the bud tender thing, I think a lot of the time dispensaries are just kind of hiring the prettiest girl they can find. Like Lady Greenstock
Yeah.
used to work at a storefront, and they would have 3 different Blue Dreams. One was the bottom, one was the mid, one was the top shelf, and sometimes they'd have a 4th one from a different grower. And it's like, it's just crazy. And what is she supposed to do when there's 4 different Blue Dreams? Like someone, even an informed customer comes in, you look at 4 different Blue Dreams, and you're like, what's going on?
yeah,
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Sort of the aesthetic seems to be the more important thing than the knowledge for being hired to be a bud tender. And I think that that's sort of endemic in in the cannabis industry. And I don't like, that's one of the reasons I don't like AN and their marketing strategy.
who?
Advanced Nutrients, who uses the
Advanced.
same sort of sex sells marketing strategy for cannabis. I just don't think it's
Yep.
necessary.
No, it's not. Everybody likes boobies and ass, but it doesn't need to be on selling bud or nutrients.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need that at your pharmacy, right? I mean, you don't
Yep.
choose the pharmacy because of how attractive the pharmacists are. I mean, yeah.
I might.
It does seem a little tangential, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
Guys, Bad Bunny Nutrients asks, what made you name it Gorilla Glue?
Oh, it was the first time Mardog and I was stopping it. Well, I was chopping and trimming, and I got a phone call on him old flip phone. The same type that I lost that started this whole deal. And I went to put it down after I talked to whoever it was that called me, and the phone was stuck to my hand. So I said, "God, this shit is just like Gorilla Glue." And that stuck, as pun, no pun intended, but it did.
Okay.
I love that story.
And also, Josie, you have another question here. What was the, well, you may have answered this, but what was the cross that GG4 was made from? Asks Red State Rebels.
Again, it was sourdough by Kim's sister.
Okay.
That Hermie to the chocolate diesel, and that made it GG4.
There you go, Red State Rebels. There's your answer, sir, in the chat.
I think it's funny that so many amazing strains come from a Hermie. Like if we look at OG Kush, it came from a Hermie. If we look at ChemDog 91, which has been literally going around from 91, it was from Dog Bud, bag seed. Just
seed.
unbelievable to me that they're still like the most popular on the market.
Yeah, we still get ragged on for not being a breeder.
I mean, I think that. Oh, sorry.
I say that if I didn't have those genetics I had in my room at the time, it wouldn't happen. So I'm the breeder, but I might not be a breeder like Karma or Sam, but I still bred that plant.
You put all the things in place, all the pieces were in place for the situation to happen. You had really good gear, and really good gear oftentimes when it crosses to other really good gear, makes amazing stuff. So
Exactly.
I mean, I've definitely I've told the story many times about how a poinsettia grower had a line of poinsettia that got infected with a phytoplasma. At the time, they didn't even know what a phytoplasma even was, but it can transmit from the parent to the offspring, and it made the plants grow differently in a way that they could cultivate better, and so they became very popular. And like sometimes an accident like that can have such a fundamental shift in growing procedure. I think that I love stories like that personally.
I'm not even growing, but in science, penicillin, for example, is an accident. And Alexander Graham Bell in the phone was an accident. It just goes on and on.
Viagra was a heart medicine.
Of them when they come around.
Yeah,
Serendipity, it's a great word.
Oh, absolutely. And laterally moving and having a novel idea like, well, what if we just did this, but with that? And like so many like lateral thoughts like that have been useful in human history, certainly.
Well, Shane said the most important thing to me is having good genetics in your grow at all times. So if an accident does happen, you can count on it being a nice accident, not hemp or something. So it's just very important to me to have top genetics, or what I think is top genetics.
Bob Ross always had happy little accidents. I think when he'd make a mistake in painting, he'd just turn it into like a bush or happy little trees.
Yeah.
Speaking of genetics, well, one of the things that I personally believe is that there was a lot of variance in a lot of the genetics from like the mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a lot of different flavor profiles that were expressed different on these different varieties. And well, I was wondering if there was any, if any of the panel members, have grown any of the really old varieties and what their experiences with those were. Because I know that nowadays we have a lot of like polyhybrids and a lot of like hype stuff that just cross back into each other. And so I wonder if if there's any opinions on some of the older stuff.
So a lot of cultivated plants tend to have like weird things like that happen, like those like introgression and like different selection pressures and things like that. I'm not really a genomicist or anything like that, but I know that cultivation practices can cause some really interesting things to happen. And a lot of times those mutations, if they are mutations and not just phenotypic changes, which I guess that's I'm not being very articulate, but I suppose what I mean is that a small little shift and change, like I was saying before, can just be so fundamentally different. And I don't know. I don't think there's any shame in that. As long as, and then when you do like a sequencing, find out what that is, it's possible that you might even be able to make something more efficient and hone that.
True. Back to his question about the old genetics. When I started growing, I guess it was 1980, when I actually did my first indoor grow. I built a metal building in Phoenix, Arizona. It was 38 foot by 42 foot. And I started growing Mexican bag seed. I didn't know nothing about growing except what was in High Times magazine. I got a bare bones HID bulb bare bones kit out of there, or 13 of them, and bootleg the power. Just made it work. But I went to San Diego with somebody and got the first indica I ever seen. It didn't have a name. It just indica. That's all it was. It wasn't, who knows what fancy name it has now, but it was a short little squat plant. It just tasted marvelous. It's something that I'd never tasted before.
Can I ask you what year this was?
Pardon me?
The year that you went to San Diego to get the cut?
Had to be about 1982, somewhere in there. A guy named Steve took me over there, and a guy named Squeaky had the plant.
In those
That's
days,
all.
there was really.
Did you just say Did you say Squeaky?
Yeah.
That's all. That's really awesome.
Yep. He wouldn't let us see the grow or nothing. I was kind of mad that these zonies come over to California to get something. We went home with the cut and thanked our lucky stars.
I might be able to find out what that cut was that you got.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
To the name, back in those days, it was before Sensi Seeds, or what was originally just called the Seed Bank, out of Holland, with Neville Schoonmaker, who just passed away. I think it was this year or last year. And he's responsible for a lot of the genetics. Like we were talking about OG Kush a little bit earlier, one that I personally enjoy a lot, that comes from Hindu Kush that hermaphrodited onto Emerald Triangle. And that started in Florida. And then Josh D, his part of the story is he popped it out in LA. And that's where the OG Kush started. So that's an early 90s thing as well.
That's neat. Those accidents is so neat.
A lot of the stuff, though, in the 90s came from that Sensi Seeds early days, like the NL, NL5, NL5 Haze. Those became a lot of people's like best line. Like there's a Washington Heights Haze in New York, or the Cuban Black Haze in Miami. And those are both just NL5 Haze crosses, allegedly.
You never know. That's what's neat about this new genetic marking deal. So someday people will know exactly what they have and what was used to sequence the genetics to get what they have. It's just amazing to me.
What do you think? What do you think about the hash plant varieties? Because from my understanding from a lot of old school cats, before there was a whole lot of different names, before the White Widows and the Northern Lights, there was a lot of imported, like Pakistani, Afghani hash plant production plants, and those were really popular in the early 80s. And do you have any background on any of the hash plants? Do you have any information on that you might be able to share?
Not really. Just like I said, back then there wasn't any names on that stuff. I think Northern Lights was maybe the first strain ever named that I know of. But I don't even know that for sure. It was just indica or sativa or
Skunk #1, I think, and Calio are a little bit predating that.
Could be true too.
Sacred Seeds was around in the 80s, and Cultivator's Choice a little bit before that. Sam the Skunk Man was part of that crew before he went off to Holland and did the Horror Farm thing. But in the 70s, there was Afghani. But after the 70s, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and that actually disrupted some of the original hash producing areas in Afghanistan that had previously been untouched for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So the Afghan before that era was really sort of a special thing. And also from Pakistan, there's a strain called 79 Christmas Bud, or the Pine Tar Kush, which is a Pakistani hash plant. So interesting, just some old genetics that come from before strain names were really a thing.
I'm
It was just
sure
missing the
those
flavor.
strains came over here and intermingled with what we had as far as the sativas that come out of Mexico and what the old heads in California were growing, and that's how we got where we are now.
There's some interesting there's some interesting hemp phytoplasmas coming from Iran and India and even China, and also there are some in North America as well. But like that's one thing about like taking the populations, the wild and even the landrace populations that have been more or less untouched for a long period of time. I'm curious about the possibility for pathogens to be passed for those who didn't test maybe in the past. For all we know, like with cannabis cryptic virus, there could be other like odd little interesting things that are hitchhiking in those populations, even from parent to offspring.
I'm sure there is. You know, just finding a land race now that is a land race is, I think, really practically impossible, because there's been so many genetics traveled around the world. I'm sure there's some in Pakistan and places, you know, in maybe South America that's never been touched by us growers that are still growing land-based stuff. But getting at her and finding them and getting seeds from them is, you know, outstanding thing. I'd love to be young enough to go do that. Just hunt the world for those specific genetics.
You know what's great? You know what's really interesting? Speaking of like kind of like land race, is I was gifted seeds by a friend who I met online, guarding the lost herbs, and he has family that lives in like Siberia in Russia, and he went and hunted cannabis at a feral field, so wild fields that are uncultivated. And he said that it's probably a mix of a lot of different Russian and Asian varieties, kind of that just self-pollinated each other, but they were all autoflower varieties. And I actually used that variety to breed with, and I did an open pollination on the Gorilla Glue 4, and I'm kind of curious to see, you know, what happens with it. It's a really interesting concept to take something like a really strong polyhybrid and then cross it back to something that's feral.
I also agree with that.
Plant More Seeds is doing a lot of this. Bodie, he's also known as @Bodie, or on Instagram he's @Plant More Seeds, because he has like 4 seed companies. One is Nyrika, where he does just landrace preservation. I'm growing one of his crosses. It's 88G13 hash plant crossed to 4M Girl Scout cookie. So he takes sort of like old school stuff and crosses it into the new hype with his Bodie seed line. But speaking of landrace, Franco, the guy who was working with a greenhouse seed company who passed away, he had got some seeds in the Congo, and Phylos is able to test the homozygousness of genetic, and it just shows like how stable or how similar it is to the other things in that line. And they said that the line from Franco from the Congo was the most homozygous or most like stable line that they had ever seen.
My understanding that the way that they would sequence that is not comprehensive enough, actually. But again, I'm not a genomicist. I just heard that somewhere.
I don't know either.
I just want to jump in real quick here because I'm more kind of a plant guy. I wanted to ask Brandon, what did that look like when you grew that out? When you were doing that pollination, what are those seeds?
Okay, so I had an extremely difficult time germinating the seeds, and I have my suspicion is that they needed to be winterized. So my theory is like this, right? So I've never had a more difficult time popping seeds, and I think they needed to have cold temperatures before they were able to germinate. But the ones I did get to germinate, the ones that survived they all turned out male because I had about 10 out of about 50 germinate, and then I ended up just killing them off because they had too much, like the soil was too fertile, and I think they just kind of wanted to be left alone, and they kind of just wanted to, I think they're maybe genetically disposed to just being in a survival mode. So they don't need a whole lot of water. They don't need a whole lot of nutrients. And so whenever I tried to even just water, they would just die. So it was weird. The only ones that really survived were the males that I had in solo cups. And they were so stressed out, and they did really well, which was really, really weird. So what I did is I just did an open pollination where I had taken a couple of Gorilla Glue 4 clones, and I had thrown them outside, and it was a little early. I had expected them to veg so I can get them really big, but they instantly flowered. And so they were in flowering for about 3 weeks, and then I hit them with that open pollination. And I've been collecting seeds over the last couple days, getting them dried out, and then I have a bunch of 3-gallon pots with some just really basic soil mixed up, and I hope to, pop some seeds and see what I get out of it, just because I'm really curious. I'm really curious to see what can come of it.
I am too, Brandon. And on that deal about the winterizing, I had made some seeds about 6 months ago and had about 50% germination rate. So I took them all and put them in the freezer for 24 hours and got 100% germ rate on them from just being in the freezer for 24 hours.
Oh, you know what? I'm having the most difficult time popping the Afghani bull rider reverse back cross, which was a staple down in San Diego for a long time. And I'm going to try to do that. I have enough seeds where I can experiment. I have a bunch of different things going, but I'm having a difficult time so far, but I'm hoping that I can bring some of the staples from San Diego back.
Brandon, recently you gifted me some seeds that were very large, and I think you mentioned that you don't really know where they came from. And if that's the case, I'm curious if anyone knows if there are any like cultivars or anything that is associated with like much larger seeds than like the usual size.
So everything that I gave to you, Matt, was things that I had bred myself. I think I had given you some ones that were just labeled with question marks, and that was just because it was my own fault at not paying close enough attention to what I was doing, or not, writing everything down in my journal. And then I remember that I gave you some seeds that were marked Landrace, right? Indoor Landrace. What's an indoor Landrace, you say? I had so much projects going on at one point because I am obsessive compulsive about popping seeds and making new stuff. I can't help myself. What I ended up doing was I had originally started off with the blueberry train wreck. I crossed that with purple kush. That got crossed into a sour diesel. And I kind of had this ongoing thing where, like, I would every once in a while, whenever I'd find like a Hermie pollen or a banana where I was trimming, I would isolate it, right? And every once in a while, I'd end up with like a couple of nanners, right, out of a couple of pounds or whatever, and I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna take this, and I'd break it up, put it on a Q-tip, and then I'd rub it on something that I really liked, and I did that for like 2 years straight. And then I was growing out seeds, making sure nothing was too unstable or nothing was unstable. And that's kind of where I came up with that whole thing. And from my experience, whenever I grow those, you just get a huge, huge expression of different, different characteristics, different flavors, different, different morphological characteristics in the way they grow. They have different nutrient and mineral needs. But it was just something that I did as kind of a, impulsively, I guess.
To your question, Matt, about seed size, I know that some breeders, I can't think of the specific lines, have mentioned that like certain strains produce extremely tiny seeds and other ones produce giant seeds, and like they've tried to get it to not do that. Like they wanted it to be more of a regular size, and whatever they tried just didn't work. So it seems strongly associated with whatever the line of genetics it comes from, and you sort of can't dictate it as the breeder, at least from the breeders I've heard talk about it.
Interesting. From both of you, I really appreciate the input. Because I know I was reading a research report that talked about how, like, phylogenetically, not like within a certain species, but in general, like size of the seed was correlated with a few interesting traits about like genetic variability and adaptation, or rather, it's the ability for like the plant to kind of be vulnerable to like speciation and change rapidly within a few generations. Anyways, interesting thing. I just thought perhaps it might be relevant to cannabis for people who are trying to grow and breed.
That's actually a really interesting point, Matt, because when you talk about a plant's ability to adapt and change, I would think that what I was doing would cause extreme variations in the genetics, and that's something that would be a really interesting thing to test out. And I wonder how you could go about doing it, because that's definitely an interesting concept.
Well, I have heard, I believe it was Subcool mentioned that he noticed when he switched from HID lighting to LED lighting, his seeds became smaller. So it may have something to do with the lighting. If you're using the HID HPS lighting, maybe you're going to get a bigger seed, and possibly if you switch to a different light source like the LEDs, you could make smaller seeds. It might have something to do with the heat or whatever. I don't know.
I just heard
I was just going to say,
Sorry,
I could see that could be a possible factor. I could see that.
growing subcool seeds out, I noticed they were very small and they like started off a little bit slower, but they, after a few weeks, caught up. And the guy that I was growing them next to that I mentioned earlier, Doja DNA, he grew outdoor in a greenhouse under the sun. So that spectrum is going to be a lot fuller, I would imagine, than any light anyone could put over top of their plants indoor. So that's something to think about.
Since cannabinoids decay reliably in the presence of ultraviolet light, and also anthocyanins and things like that work kind of like melatonin does or melanin in animal pigmentation. It's possible that that's what we're seeing, is that sort of reaction, but it's too bad that the cannabinoids maybe don't protect as much, or maybe it could just be some sort of a different stimulation. Maybe the plant, who knows? That's why I really support like looking into the sort of the metagenetic thing going on with regards to cannabis.
Mass Medical Strains is another breeder, and they talked about when they use their cob or chip on board LED lighting, they get a much higher volume or number of seeds. Like it's like maybe 3 or 4 times higher, I think, than other lights that they had tested. And that was really interesting to me. And actually one of the things that was kind of why I moved over to cob.
I wonder if it'd be great to hear from them to see if the actual size of the seed had changed when they made the switch, especially if they've grown the same plant multiple times.
That they have. I know they've done grape pupil. It's like their line, their sort of their flagship. It's like a purple strain, and they've grown it under tons of different lights. So I'm sure you could DM them, or maybe we could try and get them on the show sometime, because I've referenced them probably a zillion times on the show.
I'd be really interested, because I think it's an interesting trait, and just coming from like a traditional ag mentality about it, what like bigger seed could translate into a bigger germ, and what exactly is larger would be interesting to know. But like also it could be good for like hemp seed biomass, and or rather for like as like a seed, like for food even, or for a bunch of other possibilities.
Yeah, I haven't read into this in a while. I do recall some other research with other crops. It seems farmers, I think, almost universally select larger seeds to save to plant. But when I remember this with corn and with some varieties of beans, the larger seeds are not always the most viable or produce the best plants. But they do have a strong sort of bias. So farmers, including cannabis home growers, I think always want to select them. I got 2 seeds of Jack Herrera, and one of them was like 3 times bigger than the other seed. So I was only going to pop one, and I certainly popped the larger one.
Yeah, I mean, like it certainly would have some advantages and some disadvantages for all, all contexts, But yeah, I do think that's a good point. Like a lot of times there is a bias towards getting larger seed. And ostensibly, I would think it would at least have a bigger energy source in the beginning. But you're right; it might not have the same.
Right, but I mean, as long as they get through the beginning, then that becomes moot after like 3 days, right? And you're more interested in other aspects of the genetics other than the size of the seed. So,
I totally agree with that.
yeah, I think that you can't really tell much, but again, there's sort of an overwhelming bias. So when I was looking at the 2 seeds and one of them was much bigger than the other, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do the bigger one. I mean, was hard to kind of convince myself to go the other way.
So I'm going to throw out something kind of a little devil's advocate. I've gone for like the smaller ones because in my experience, like the runty plants, the small yielding plants, the ugly ones, the really slow growers at first, typically in my experience have been like just anecdotally really potent or extremely flavorful. So I've always just like out of a challenge to try and get them to grow better and bigger. And also another thing I've heard a lot of breeders talk about is when they're breeding, they don't always pick the male that is like the first to throw pollen or the biggest and fastest and most vigorous, because oftentimes that's sort of old traits of hemp, and it breeds sort of lower THC if you get like sometimes, and it depends on what lines you're working with and how much CBD is in there already. But some of them have thrown the idea out there that they believe the more vigorous isn't always necessarily better.
That totally makes sense to me, right?
Yeah,
I was mostly
especially,
thinking.
yeah.
I was just mostly thinking applications for like seed oil or that kind of thing.
If you look at the male donor plants that they use for the commercial varieties of corn, you would be like shocked and dismayed. They're the runtiest little, like, terrible looking plants that would never produce anything on their own, but they produce excellent pollen, homozygotic pollen that can be crossed with the female.
And that speaks to the IBL, right? Because we talked earlier, Joesy was saying from Mycotech, his IBL from GG4 was kind of runty and couldn't throw that much pollen, but maybe it's just extremely homozygous, so it's great to breed with.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there can be some significant depression in a plant that really is purely homozygotic like that. It's when you cross it then with something else that unlocks, it makes it totally heterozygotic and unlocks the heterosis.
That makes a lot of sense.
Speaking of the runted and stunted plant, isn't that why you trashed GG3, Joesy?
Your mic was really tough. I didn't hear that, Chef.
I was speaking about the stunted and not so vigorous plants. Isn't that why you trashed GG3, Joesy?
I believe that's what he said, but he's not in the chat at the moment.
Chef, can you try and clear that up? Your mic is really bad, buddy.
Yeah, I'm just in a different area.
Sure.
I think it's Brandon.
Oh, is it Brandon? Is that you, Brandon?
Oh, I'm sorry. It might be. Hold on. I'm trying to.
Just make sure you mute your mic if you're not talking.
Right.
The American one's talking I've been talking in the chat a little bit, and a shout out to the American one. He was mentioning that hemp made for seed or an oil is typically way bigger, according to him. Just an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, that would certainly make sense.
just with seed breeding, I saw a visual demonstration with Mammoth P. Colin from Ethos Genetics posted when he used no Mammoth P, the beneficial microbe, and when he used Mammoth P, the seeds actually weighed more when he used the beneficial microbes, and they were more higher percent were a darker sort of tiger stripe seed, less were like that gray, green or unviable looking seed.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, like, just speaks to how much morphology can be affected by how you grow in the actual cycle. Genetics, notwithstanding.
If you really want to go deep down the rabbit hole, I wish I could quote exactly where I heard this, but I remember somebody, it might have been Colin Bell, said that they have seen early research that if both breeding plants are infected by a certain fungi, for example, that fungi, if it makes that symbiotic relationship with the plant, can actually be carried into the seed itself too, so that the offspring of that plant would also already be pre-inoculated.
Yeah, seed endophytes are a thing, and pathogens can also take advantage of that. Botrytis is one example of this. Although it's not necessarily documented in cannabis, it is in other plants.
So going back to the Mammoth P, maybe one of the 4 strains in there is capable of doing that. It would maybe count for maybe a little extra weight in each seed because of that. Maybe, I don't know. That's just a theory.
Possibly, although I doubt it would be like from the tissue. It might be from like maybe even modulation of the genes. Like mycorrhizal fungi can do that on contact with an interesting like 3-way handshake genetically. Such a fascinating thing to talk about, but there are so many disciplines involved that it's hard to really, as someone who isn't part of the vast majority of them, to like keep up on in total comprehension.
So just to give a little bit of a stat for the ethos thing I mentioned earlier, the non-beneficial microbes average weight of the seed was 15 milligrams versus the beneficial microbes had a 20 milligram. So it was a 5 milligram increase on average across a large batch of seeds from the same genetic Mandarin cookies, R2.
That is pretty significant.
And I guess it would be beneficial.
But only if like the seeds that you're growing after like are like you were saying before, like that might be good. The result might be good, but if the plant doesn't grow well, just like in all the in all the cases, it has to grow well, right? No matter what.
Exactly. It's got to have at least a baseline. It has to grow well.
Hey guys, are heavier seeds more money? Josh Colbert asks in the chat.
No, I've never seen a seed sold by weight unless you're buying like a kilo of them to sell as a seed bank. I think most people are buying seeds in 1, 3, 5, or 10 packs as far as like a small consumer goes. And those are always going to be sold by the amount and have a cost associated with that amount. Not ever have I seen one sold by weight.
Okay.
I feel like the seeds would have to get quite big for that to be important.
No, I want the skinny seed
standpoint.
discount. I want the skinny seed discount, man. If they send little gray seeds, little skinny seeds, take $5 off.
I mean, yeah, no, I mean, like, yeah, put the price down a lot, so everyone, yeah. Instead, that is what I meant.
Yeah, some guys. I mean, here's a question for you guys. I mean, why? Well, I mean, why the hell seeds are? Why are they so much money?
All the time.
Because of laws.
Yeah, it's sort of the market dynamics too. It has to do with sort of the amount of demand that's available to support them and the supply issues. But yeah, there's a lot of legal issues involved too.
I think a certain amount is the value of the crop that they produce. I mean, cannabis is still federally illegal, which makes the ounce or pound price extremely high. So if you're buying a seed for $5 to $10 a seed, it might seem extremely high compared to like a tomato. But when you're harvesting like 3 or 4 ounces or maybe even a pound off of that plant, that pound is going to be worth so much more. And granted, you have to invest in the electricity and nutrients and things of that nature and time cultivating it. But the seed is what allowed it to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the difference at that point between a $5 seed and like a $30 seed in terms of the total investment in the grow is so marginal that it really wouldn't be a significant economic factor for most commercial grows either. I think that if you're paying too much attention to the value of the seeds, you're losing sight of the larger picture.
I feel like there's potential for the value of the crop to match that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to imagine a plant producing $25 worth of more product or producing, product that's qualitatively worth $25 more. I mean, it's not hard to imagine that at all. And sort of the griping and moaning about some of the costs of seeds. Now, I think the luxury pricing that goes on in seeds is a bit of a problem as well, that people intentionally sort of overprice things to make them seem more attractive or appealing than they actually would be. And I suspect that that's a case with a lot of the sort of luxury priced seeds.
Can I say something as somebody who, I don't consider myself a breeder, but I do make seeds. I think that the prices a lot of people put on seeds are exuberant. And the problem, I think, is even if you make like S1s, even if you test them, you have to do a lot of work to get like to a point where you have something that's going to be kind of uniform or stable. You're never going to have genetically identical stock. And one of the things is, unless you have genetically identical stock, you never know what you're going to get. And I think people often advertise as like, this is what you're going to get when you have the seed. This is this is what it's going to smell like. This is the potency. And those variables are so widely ranging from, variables, from different variables, different factors, different growing styles, that I think there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to that. And for somebody who's like a legitimate seed maker to put exuberant prices on things that they call exotics, or things where they really don't know if that line is going to produce something consistent, I think it gives the end user kind of a negative experience if they don't get exactly what they were expecting. And so I think it's really important, too, for people who are doing breeding projects or who are breeders and who are releasing seeds onto the market to be truthful and say, hey, this is what this is. These are the different, show all the different variances in your phenotypes, and show, hey, you can do this with this. This is how you can train this. This is how this plant likes to feed, if it's a light feeder, heavy feeder. Having that kind of information will end up helping the end user, and I don't see a whole lot of that. I'd like to see more of that. That way people can be more informed about how they can cultivate those different varieties.
I agree in that, at the end of the day, it's, we're talking about ascribing value to something, and a transaction only happens when somebody, not only happens, there are extenuating circumstances, but it is like a market dynamics thing. So price is not a proxy for quality, I suppose. It just depends on what you want, right?
Right, but growers think it is. I think it's going to be hard to sort of come into the cannabis seed market with a low price sort of strategy to gain market share, even if you had a really quality product, because the impression, and MP Oyo from Chile brought this up with his growers. He's like, people don't trust the cheap stuff. And I think that's sort of implicit in what I was talking about with luxury pricing. When something is more expensive, we have a tendency to think it's a higher quality, sort of regardless of the quality. And that encourages certain products to be overpriced, specifically because that makes them appear to be a better deal in the end.
That's actually a salient point.
I'd like to play devil's advocate and sort of disagree with everything everyone's saying, because I think that seed prices should go up higher than they already are. And I think that we're going to see that happen. I think if we look at aficionado, for example, and Brandon, I hate to pick on you, but you always talk about the fact that you've never actually purchased seeds. So when we're talking about consistency of breeders, there are breeders out there that put out really good work. Humboldt Seeds is one example. They have photos of rooms that look like clones, and they have test results where the plants are between 27 and 30% THC on a whole entire 100 plant grow room. All starts from seed. The terpene tests are extremely similar, like high in limonene and myrcene, or whatever the specific strain is going for. And the other thing I'd like to say is not all breeders' lines are all consistent. They might have one consistent line and another line that's not as consistent, like Humboldt Seeds, for example. Another one is Cinderella 99 from Brothers Grimm. My mentor has grown 10 of those seeds out, and I literally thought it was a clone run because when I came over, all 10 of them looked exactly the same height, same leaf structure, and all but one had a very, very similar smell. So it was extremely hard for him to pick because they were so similar from seed.
And I think that one of the things that plays a big role in that is the genetic stability of the line too, because some things will always express themselves over other traits. You know, they'll put these recessive traits on the back burner, and you might always get like somewhat consistency in the line, but you know it's not always that way. And I mean, like, you know, I don't buy seeds and stuff, but I know there's a lot of good breeders. CSI Humboldt is a really good company that has a lot of old school stuff, and their name constantly comes up amongst the people that I'm working with right now doing the old school San Diego lines, the Bull Rider, Afghani Bull Rider, P91, and I'm hoping to be able to work with some of these people in the future. It's all about networking. But, you know, I think that the biggest thing is just if a breeder or seed maker are able to, you know, say, hey, this is what this is how it is, run the lines. That's what it's all about, is just having transparency, I think.
That's the other thing is the way we're talking, it sort of assumes that they're not testing, and people like Duke Diamond are testing, and by their notes, it's very apparent. They tell you how much the stretch is, what will make it hermy, what won't make it hermy. And I think it's like a slap in the face to the people that have actually done the work to say that this stuff doesn't exist when it does. And I think that the value is so high, like even the people that get criticized, Aficionado, for example, they had $700 or $800 10 packs, which is extremely high. Okay. I admit that it's very high, but when you buy that seed, they have a guarantee on germination, and they also have a buyback guarantee. So for whatever reason you have buyer's remorse, you ever see them at a show, contact them online, they'll buy the seeds back for full price years later, as long as they're sealed in the original breeder pack. And I think if somebody's going to do that, they can afford to be sort of on the luxury end. And like DJ Short, somebody who's been in the game for 30 plus years and has a very distinct line with Blueberry, when he put out his new berry, it was like $450 for a 10 pack, I believe. So is that too expensive? Maybe for some, but it's not for everybody. And they're limited release.
I think what he's doing with those is actually trying to luxury price. That's different than just a high price due to scarcity. A high price due to scarcity because you don't have a lot and there's a market demand for it, and sort of supply and demand create a market situation that sets a price at $450 per 10 pack or whatever it is. That's different. A market-driven price like that is different than a luxury price where you're slapping some outrageous value on something to make it appear to be more valuable than it actually is.
I don't think any of the guys that I've referred to are doing that. There are people in the industry doing that, but I don't think that the guys that I'm referring to are, because like you said, it is a supply and demand thing. They've won Emerald Cups. They only have so much farm that they can grow. They only have so many seeds that they can make. So if they only want to do that,
well, then that
1
should
year,
be a supply and demand thing only for a couple of years until they can increase the supply of those seeds to answer that market demand and bring
why should they make less money,
market
though?
price. They're not going to make less money. That's how market dynamics work. So you bring more product to the market, you increase volume so you can operate at a more efficient point in the supply demand curve.
Does Ferrari do that?
If you're
because they
Well,
get
that's how
300
any
orders every
business
year.
would do
and
it.
they
If you
make
have a
200
very
cards.
popular product that's worth much more, that's selling for much more than the cost of production. So you got to think about the cost of production and the profitability of the product that you're manufacturing. In this case, seeds. If you're selling a 10-pack of seeds for $450, the cost of production isn't nearly $450. Your profit margins are huge. There's way better places for you to increase volume, to actually increase net profit by selling more seeds at a lower cost. So if you're not going in that direction, it's because you're trying to maintain the luxury added value that exists on high price strains. I'll buy the supply and demand market, or the supply and demand argument for cannabis seeds really only for a couple of years, because if you're really in it for the business and it's really being driven by the quality of the genetics, then the efficient economic point of sale would be lower than that.
So here's an interesting topic, right? So if we're talking about luxury genetics, why don't we get into once federal legislation passes, what's going to happen with international markets when they open up, and different areas having different type of cultivars that respond different to different soil sample, different soils in different regions, like you have your Champagne in France. How do you guys think that might play a part in future cannabis cultivation, cannabis breeding, cannabis marketing on an international market?
I think it's mitigated by the fact that so much cannabis is grown indoors. So I don't think it's the same as thinking about sort of like wine grapes and how they would grow differently around the world, or how different varietals perform in different climates. I think a lot of cannabis, a lot of commercial cannabis is now grown in climate controlled greenhouses in media that's specifically designed, and usually in cocoa core, actually.
I just wanted to bring up, maybe it's just like a small time perspective or whatever to me, but I'm completely fine with paying $10 a seed. That seems to be right around what the industry standard is. I think that's a fair price for this, the quality seed that I get for that price. I don't have time to do all the work to be a breeder myself. I've got a lot of growing to do. So, but I don't think it's a bad thing for companies to want to try to get more money for what they're, but I'm never paying that price. There's no way. I'm not paying 2-3 times the amount. So I think the free market will take care of that, because what's going to happen is if I want that strain that's $400, I'll let the guys who sell clones buy that, and then I'll pay $10 for the clone. It's just there's other ways around it. Those guys are never going to get super rich at doing that, because there's just other ways around it. The industry's already.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The market is so small for the people that are willing to spend that much money that they could make much more sort of gross profit if they approach the market in a different way. The only reason that you wouldn't want to do that is because the genetics don't necessarily match the reputation. And so you're selling seeds more off of reputation than you're selling them off of genetics. I mean, that's just what I suspect when I see those things. I might be wrong.
I can kind of understand the sentiment to that, but like, for example, I recently bought a Kiowa cultivar blackberry plant, and I did a little bit of research about it because it was a little bit expensive for the age it was, but it was part of a USDA R&D program to increase increase and ever-bearing traits and flavor and other aspects of that. And I totally understand that if as long as we're in a system where you got to pay money to live and spend money and all this sort of a thing, then it makes sense to recoup the costs of research and development, for example, especially an organization like the USDA. I try to think about, and I know that I specifically don't have the luxury of having every single purchase I ever make be the most ethical choice I ever make, or that I feel like it will be. But I try to think, all right, am I buying this from someone who, the considerations that you brought up, do I think that they're overpricing it for a reason that's nefarious or anything like that, or is it in fact not the case.
Well, I don't even want to say that it's nefarious. I mean, there's whole markets of things. This is why some women's handbags cost $800 or $1,000 or $2,000. I mean, it doesn't actually cost that much to make the bag. And the reason that it's sold at that price point is because it adds to the appeal of the product. Selling it at a higher value actually makes people feel better about like carrying it and going around with it. That's the whole idea behind the luxury pricing. I'm sure some people are satisfied with that sort of approach to the cannabis seeds. I just think that, I mean, sure, if you want to try to get into the market, if you're trying to like start, if you have something that's really cool, but in the long run, there are going to be better business models if you really have a good strain to sell.
Yeah,
It's all about the marketing.
Yeah, I think we all understand that. We all understand this. So I think, especially in the cannabis market, we're all been kind of have that suspicion in the back of our minds. So I think, you know, tactics like what Philos did, yeah, it's going to be a fool me once kind of a thing. It's not going to be a fool me again. So I think I completely agree with what was being said. Is like it's going to sort itself out really quick. You know, you're only going to get away with it for just, you know, not very long before word gets out, because everything's word of mouth. We're not even allowed to advertise. So if you don't have a good reputation, you're done. Reputation is everything in the business.
Back before silk was very common everywhere in the world, the Chinese had the monopoly on silkworms, and they guarded that secret so long. But even with all their precautions, people were able to people dressed up as priests, went into their monasteries, stole the larvae and their mulberry leaves in canes, brought it back like thousands of kilometers, and they like started a population, started making their own silk. I think the Romans did this. Like people will find a way to subvert the obstacle.
It's like Lumpa's headband was a cut that was taken out of like a room in New York and then brought all the way out to the West Coast. It was like in a trimmer's pocket. So there's stories like that in cannabis as well. But I think what I was saying earlier with like the luxury model, looking at vehicles like Ferrari, they get about 300 plus orders every year, and they hand make every car, and they only sell 200 every year because at their profit margins, it just makes sense for them to do it. They've been doing it like this for many, many years. And I think in cannabis, we're going to see some brands taking that approach. Not to say that it's right or moral or the best way or the most profitable way, but I do think that there will be a market like that. And I don't think 700 is going to be the highest seed pack sold. I've seen 2,000, 3,000 auctions on Instagram.
I totally agree. And for some cuts, probably even more than that. I mean, people really do want those genetics, and sometimes there's the market space to sort of protect them. The fundamental thing that's different with the Ferrari, though, is they actually invest a lot of money in a Ferrari compared to like, you know, a Ford. There's a lot more of an investment made into them. And in cannabis seeds, fundamentally, once you get going, the costs of production are pretty small. So it's not sort of the same market, and it's because those costs of production are so small that it makes it more sense to target a lower price point than for example a Ferrari. But yeah, that's
I just think with the seasonal aspect of outdoor cannabis, how those people are growing, like I'm just looking at outdoor sun-grown cannabis that is being entered into the Emerald Cup, which I personally think is like one of the only cups that has legitimacy behind it anymore. A lot of people don't trust like High Times or any other cup. They think it's just bought off by the sponsors, whatever. But a lot of people seem to really trust the Emerald Cup. After whoever wins the Emerald Cup, every year their seed sales go crazy. The price of that cut or the seeds, it just goes up and up and up. And so if you have the people on your team, like Aficionado, he got Mean Gene to do a line, Black Lime Reserve. He's got his own Cherry Noir, and those were both Emerald Cup winning strains. That's only once a year. So if you have those in your stable and you're selling them for that season, I just don't see that price dropping. I think as cannabis gets bigger, more and more people are going to want seeds from that guy from the Emerald Cup. And if he just keeps doing it the same way he's doing it, each year he's going to sell out all of his seeds. He's going to make a bunch of money back and be really happy with it. And he hasn't spoken on trying to expand or make it bigger, because I think, like you mentioned earlier, if everybody could afford Gucci, it wouldn't have as much value if they were selling $3 handbags. But when you pay a lot more for it, people feel special. And it's not for everyone. Like, I'm not going to be paying $700 for those seeds, but there is a luxury market. And it's just for that select group of people that might even just want to feel elite for paying more, if not even.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. Right. And I just want other people to understand that you can probably get sort of similar quality genetics for the $10 or $20 a seed price point. And I think that there's a lot of room in that market. And I'm not really opposed to paying $20 a seed or even $30 a seed. Like I said, you're going to recover a lot of that. If the plant actually is a better plant. I mean, you're going to recover all of it. It's ridiculous. If you're growing a plant that's even a little bit better than another one, it's worth more than $30 more than the other one, right? Like
when you do the math and the back of the envelope calculation, right?
Yeah, just clearly. I mean, I've had 2 plants in my tent, and I have 2 plants in my tent right now. One of them's worth hundreds of dollars more than the other plant. I mean, that's just like obvious at this point, right? So like if I paid $20 more for that seed, it would totally be worth it in the end. And I think that we gripe and moan a little bit too much at that bottom end. I'm just sort of shocked by some of the top end luxury prices. That's all.
Yeah,
With the
I just
ability
wanna
to go
bust-
international. Sorry, go ahead, Spartan.
I was just saying, I just want to bust the myth about being special. You're only going to be special for a little while. Come on, if you've been in the scene for a while, you know the elite cuts aren't very elite for very long. So the people that want to get super tired and chase the next elite strain every single year, go ahead, have at it. But the stuff that's selling in volume is the same stuff that's been popular for the last 10 years. So it's more important to find a strain that works good in your environment and stop chasing the hype. I honestly think it's going to be, if it ever becomes as legal as a tomato, you know, it's going to be just like there's tomatoes. You know, there is a fringe market for the most high strains and stuff. But I mean, I can get 1,000 tomato seeds for $1. So I mean,
What happens when cannabis is like that? When it's international and in Colombia, they can grow acres of it and sell it to us for pennies a gram. And it's
Yeah,
actually
I'm not an economist by any means, but I think that's a really good point. Like extraneous market dynamics do exist, and sometimes they're very discreet and subtle.
yeah, it's like everybody's dancing around it. But the reason the prices are high is because it's not legal everywhere. That's the reason.
Right. Well, and that limits the supply of the seeds. That limits the amount of people that are in production, and it also provides the space to make the prices much higher than they would be. Right.
Even legal producers' prices are artificially inflated because when they sell it, it's eventually going to wind up on the street, get resold. So, you know, they know it has a certain value because they're seeing it resold in the UK for 6 times what they're selling it for at the dispensary. So it's like there's always going to be value in cannabis if we make it illegal certain places, because the illegal places are going to have to pay a lot more for it. So there's going to be export and import and all that stuff.
Right, and that's all the point I was trying to make is the thing that's really set the price and even the quasi-legal state of it in some of our states. Thank God for that. But still, with all the taxes and the regulations and the licensing fees, who's really setting the prices on this? It's not anybody in the whole supply chain. It's the government.
Well, the reality is, yeah, the only way they're going to be able to maintain a high price point for cannabis is by restricting supply. And that's sort of what you're seeing with the various legalization movements. A lot of the players in the industry now have an interest in keeping a high price point. So they're probably going to, I'm not looking forward. It would be great if the price of cannabis would sort of hover around the price of production like it does with most commodities, but I don't think that that's going to be allowed to happen.
Hey guys, are there patents on strains? Josh Colbert asks.
Yes.
Okay.
There's one CBD if it's a CBD dominant strain that produces no myrcene, it's completely broad spectrum patented. I can't think of the company who owns the patent, but it's unfortunate because Medicinal Genomics has proof that they're going to try and fight it with the Jamaican lion strain, which is a high CBD strain that doesn't produce myrcene. But I don't know if they had the info out there before the patent was placed. And those things cost millions, if not billions, to challenge.
So the patent says if you don't have myrcene, then we have a patent on that. That's a cannabis plant.
High CBD.
That's a pretty rare strain, isn't it, Jack?
It is. It's a mutation, I believe. So it only shows up in a few varieties, and it's only been documented a couple times. But like I said, Medicinal Genomics has that Jamaican lion after the fact that the broad spectrum patent has been put out there. It's similar to the concentrate patent, where there's like, if you have 95% concentrate of THC and then 5% of any terpenes or any other concentration, they have a patent on that. Same with CBD, 95% or higher plus other cannabis or non-cannabis derived terpenes mixed in.
That's interesting, because I wonder that if you had a different mutation or different, if you achieve the same result in a different way, is it a process patent or is it a product patent? I don't understand really the dynamics.
So there's a few different ways to go about it. I think everyone should probably listen to like Medicinal Genomics YouTube videos about this. Open Cannabis Project, after they left Phylos, talked a little bit about this. They're going to be able to describe the different legal forms of patents. And one of them, like, for example, can only last a year. And then after that, they have to pay a bunch of money to try and maintain it. There's a whole bunch of different, that's the patent variety, PPV. The one that I was referring to earlier is longer lasting. It's I can't think of the categorization of patent that it is, but it's like one that affects the whole industry. So if you are sort of caught using that thing or saying that you're producing your own unique thing and it's theirs or it represents what they have patented, they can come after you